Do you know, Piers, I don't know if I've been personally affected, but I know that I've received messages from hundreds of people at this point, ordinary people, many of them nothing to do with politics, never paid attention to politics, never really cared, who were horrified and shocked by this in a very profound way. And I think it's a number of things. You know, you've just had this very fierce discussion about political violence, and we're talking about politicians. But people forget that Charlie was not a politician. This is a 31-year-old guy who went around college campuses and now his two young children. I mean, I was putting my son to bed last night and I was thinking of his kids. And I know that millions of people around the world are thinking about that because they didn't see Charlie as a politician. Because I guess with America's history of political violence, all the way back to Abraham Lincoln, we kind of know that these things can happen. But I think what this has done is it's taken violence into a whole new realm. It's taken violence into the realm of people who just have conversations, for God's sake. And I think this changes everything in a very profound way. Of course, it has the potential to chill the debate, to scare people away from saying the things that they believe, the things that they think are important to say. I hope that doesn't happen. I know that my experience and the experience of many other people who do speak in public over the last few days has been a shock and horror and perhaps fear too that has morphed into resolve and an unwillingness to let this become the way that our conversations become silent, which I think is what Charlie would have wanted. But as for the debate we've just heard, look, I'm in a very conciliatory mood, and I think it's important that we're all responsible with our words. But I found it difficult to sit there and listen to this preposterous conversation you've just had. I don't understand what I mean. This time last year, I sat across from one of your guests, Cenk, on that particular occasion, in which he tried to persuade me for 20 minutes that Donald Trump was a fascist. That's how the left talks about their political opponents. And I'm someone who's not politically affiliated. I'm just looking at the facts of what I see. We have had for the last 10 years, what has happened to the word Nazi as a result of the woke left's behavior is completely unacceptable. This is a word that we had for a very specific group of people that was supposed to describe people who believe in National Socialism and fascism. These words have very specific meanings, and the meanings that they had were very important for being able to describe people who are actually of that opinion. And instead, both in America and here across the Atlantic in Britain, we've had, and we're not talking about people on Twitter or people on Blue Sky. I'm talking about David Lammy, who's the current deputy prime minister, talking about a group of conservative Eurosceptics and saying they're worse than Nazis. We've had this for a whole decade now, the complete dehumanization of people for simply having political disagreements. And so when I see that the killer of Charlie Kirk had these so-called anti-fascist inscriptions on his ammunition, I'm not surprised. I'm not shocked. Of course this would happen. And people like to pretend that this has no consequence. Well, think about it, Piers. You're a man, I'm a man. If you and I thought that fascism was actually here, as we keep being told, wouldn't it be our duty to stand up and fight? So can we really be surprised then when some deranged guy picks up a rifle and shoots someone who people on the media, people on TV keep saying is a fascist, keep saying is a Nazi? Is completely irresponsible. And I'll just make one other point on this because, you know, we've had this conversation. Lewis has talked about, well, there's violence on the left and violence on the right. He's right. Of course, there are deranged people on both sides. In a country with easy access to firearms, there will be that sort of violence like we've seen in our country. It's not just Joe Cox who's been killed in this country. We also had Sir David Ames, an MP, be killed in Britain too. And he was a member of the Conservative Party, killed by an Islamist. And on we go. But there's one thing that I've noticed. A great mentor of mine once told me, he said, Konstantin, the greatest insights come from looking at what is not there. And the one thing I have noticed that hasn't been there in my mind, you tell me if this is different for you, Piers, over the last few days, I've had no expectation that there would be burning, looting, riots in the streets, attacks on police officers across America or Britain or the rest of the West. We haven't seen any of that, and we haven't expected any of that. And that's because political violence has been normalized on these far extremes of the left. And when you see those people celebrating, what they are expressing is now a widely held opinion, particularly among young people on the woke left, that if they don't agree with somebody, if they're not getting their way politically, they're entitled to use violence to achieve their aims. We took cancel culture away from them when Elon Musk took over X and opened up the conversation and forced other social media platforms to open up the conversation. So now, instead of using cancel culture, we've got violence culture. And everybody has to pull back. And I'm not calling for any kind of censorship, because censorship will not solve this. But the people who have spent the last decade calling their political opponents fascist, Nazis, and so on, they have blood on their hands, and they need to look in the mirror now and stop.